Myself, Yasin Khan, General Member of ISC. It gives me an immense pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to all of you present here for Startups in India, an overview and legal perspective. The Institute Innovation Council, an initiative created by an Indian government, is conducting this workshop. It hosts events and addresses on topics such as startup, innovation, intellectual property rights, and entrepreneurship. The goal of the committee is to actively promote a positive culture to build a startup ecosystem and encourage innovation. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Sandeep sir to say few words. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Yasin, and very good morning to all of you, all students, then our guest of honor, Mr. Veer, and Rushali Madam as well. So this is again one more session under the Institute Innovation Council cell. And as you know, today we have a very interesting session, and resource person of the same is Mr. Veer. So I would like to add something so that maybe our guest can address the few points or maybe the pointers under this particular topic. So as you know, the government of India has taken several initiatives maybe to encourage the growth of startups in order to promote the entrepreneurship or maybe the employment by providing various maybe IPR facilitation is there, or maybe favorable taxation system is there, or easier compliance for the setting up of company, isn't it? Number of things are there, but even then the startups in India have to deal with various obstacles, like maybe the funding is one of the issue, then insufficient skills, or maybe lack of marketing strategies. A number of things we can add over here, and over that startups have obligation, isn't it? That is the important point, to operate in compliance with the laws and follow the ethical behavior. So we expect sir will address on this particular or important points so that students can gain this preliminary information to land up in any kind of the entrepreneurship or maybe the business setup. So over to you, Yasin.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. I would now like to express our gratitude to our esteemed speaker, Mr. Veer Kankaria, who has accepted our invitation to preside over this workshop. Mr. Veer Kankaria is an advocate practicing primarily at Bombay High Court and Supreme Court of India. He was associated with Vadya Gandhi and Co. in past. Some of the core areas practiced by Mr. Veer are civil commercial litigation, corporate commercial litigation, insolvency disputes, and property matters. So, without any further ado, let's begin with the workshop. Over to you, sir.
Sure. So, guys, before we start with the presentation, let's have a brief idea about what the topic is. It's about the startups, the initiatives by the government, which have been taken as regards the startups, and the legal compliances that are involved. So, I will be giving you a legal perspective as to how to start. Whenever you have an idea, how to materialize it in the form of a startup, what are the routes that you can take, what are the legal machineries that you can take, do you want to incorporate into a company, an LLP, a partnership, what are the pros and cons of each and every form of machinery. Then I will be covering throughout the presentation as to how do you register yourself on the portal, how do you avail of the benefit schemes, the various since the past 4 to 5 years since the BJP government has come into picture, they've come up with a lot of schemes. So how do you avail those benefits? What are the tax benefits? What are the legal benefits of and then also what is classified as a startup and what is not classified as a startup. So these are briefly the few topics that I will be covering. I will just on my presentation I will share my screen so that you guys can have a look at it as I this thing. Yeah. So is the screen visible to you guys?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So the topic for the presentation and the topic for the discussion, guys, is startups in India, an overview and legal perspective. The basic objective is to analyze the trends of the growth of startups, especially after the initiatives which have been taken up by the government. The secondary objective is to see what the legal compliances are in the formation and running of a startup. So guys, before we move on to startup, let's understand the basics. What is entrepreneurship? Because startups, they emerge from the concept of entrepreneurship, the capacity and willingness to develop, organize, and manage a business venture along with any of its risks in order to make a profit. So the profit element is something that is very crucial in entrepreneurship. In economics, entrepreneurship combined with land, labor, and natural resources and capital can produce profit. Whereas a startup is an organization dedicated to creating something new under the conditions of extreme uncertainty. It involves innovation, offering a new concept or something that is not widely available. So one of the peculiar factors of a startup, guys, is that it has to have some element of novelty or innovation. Not necessarily novelty, but then something innovative has to be there, something out of the box or something of that sort. The primary aim of an entrepreneur is to earn profit, whereas a startup founder's primary aim is mostly to show their innovation to the world. I've given a few examples also. Then the advantages, guys, of a startup are that there is no a certain limit or a certain cap as to how much you can grow or scale whenever you have your own startup. Again, then these are a few points like you don't have to answer anyone. You can do things as per your own. And nowadays, guys, there is a lot of seed funding that is available. There are a lot of angel investors, incubators that are there who are ready to fund your startups. And then they can also, even for the consumers, they're very beneficial because they can offer you much better pricing than these big corporations because of the freedom of management and the decision making freedom that they have. And then again, the ecosystem that is developing in India, especially since the past 4 to 5 years, it's very conducive to startups considering the policies and schemes that have been launched by the government. Also, there are many incubators. So what an incubator is, guys? An incubator is is some sort of an organization that gives you all the conducive factors to run your startup, be it funding, be it research, be it hiring employees, using workspaces, so on and so forth. We'll come to that later, what an incubator is and what is the eligibility of an incubator. Then certain cons of having yourself getting registered as a startup is that you won't really get a seed funding unless your startup is exceptionally promising. The ecosystem is still in process, it's not really developed. Another major challenge which most of the startups face is that new employees are not really hired easily, or even if you hire, then it's not necessary that you'll get experienced employees for managerial or technical positions, because people mostly prefer joining companies. These are a few of the cons. Then moving on, guys, let us talk about the types of startups. Number one, scalable startups. Companies in a tech niche often belong to this group. Since technology companies often have great potential, they can easily access the global market. Tech businesses can receive financial support from investors and grow into international companies. Examples of such startups include Google, Uber, Facebook, and Twitter. So, scalable startups basically mean that the startups which have started from scratch, but then they have scaled to such levels that they have grown 100x, 1000x manifold. Amazon is the biggest example. I'm not included here, but then I would like to mention Amazon is one such example, which it started as an online bookstore and now it is the world's biggest marketplace. Then secondly, then the next one is small business startups. So not every startup has to be a Facebook or a Twitter or a LinkedIn or some big company like Google. There can also be small startups like these businesses are created by regular people and are self-funded. They grow at their own pace and usually have a good site but don't have an app. Grocery stores, hairdressers, bakers, and travel agents are perfect examples. So basically, like just taking an example from here, a bakery. So a person is good at baking and he starts his own business from his house and opens a small Instagram page. Even that is a startup, even though it's not a big company, but then you can still classify it as a startup. Then lifestyle startups, people who have hobbies and are eager to work on their passion can create a lifestyle startup. They can make a living by doing what they love. We can see a lot of such examples. Let's take dancers. Like nowadays, because of social media and YouTube and everything, there are many lifestyle startups as well, guys. Like wellness, health, and these categories. Then the next one is viable startups. So certain startups are made specifically with the motive of selling it to larger companies. So giants like Amazon, Uber, and Google, these guys, they buy these small startups and then develop them over time and receive benefits. Then big business startups. So the peculiar factor of these big business startups is that large companies invest into startups and they develop them on their own. So large companies have a finite lifespan since customers' preferences, technologies, and competitors can change over time. That's why businesses should be ready to adapt to new conditions. So there are traditional organizations like, Tata and, your Reliance and all, but then still even they need to adapt. So a big business startup, a venture, the biggest example could be Geo, guys. If you guys would have noticed the innovation behind Geo, the way they had launched their products, the schemes they had given. So even that is a big business startup. Even though the name involved is Reliance, but then still even that can be classified as a startup. Then the next category, guys, is a social startup. So these startups exist despite the general belief that the main aim of all startups is to earn money. There are still companies designed to do good for other people, and they are called social startups. So, guys, charities, non-profit organizations, etc. So these startups are not working primarily with the motive of earning profit. Their aim is to create a difference to the society or contribute in some positive manner whatsoever. So moving on, guys, I would be naming a few schemes that have been launched by the government. That's Skill India, Digital India, Startup India. Most important one that we are going to cover in this presentation or this whole meeting is Startup India. Then Jan Dhan Yojana, Mudra Bank Yojana, Make in India, C2 Fund, e-Biz Portal, Atal Innovation Mission, Deen Dayal Upadhyaya Yojana. The next one, guys, let's talk about the initiative, the Startup Initiative. It was announced by PM Narendra Modi on 15th August 2015. It was launched on 16 January 2016 at Vigyan Bhavan, New Delhi. It was organized by Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion and Ministry of Commerce and inaugurated by Finance Minister Shri Arun Jaitley. The chief guest was PM Narendra Modi, and many startups CEOs and they had attended this the initiative that we're talking about. The benefits under this scheme, what all benefits the startups are going to avail. Number one is self-certification. So guys, as we all know, for any business, depending on the type and the category of business, there are a lot of certifications that are involved. So under this scheme, if you get registered, you can self-certify, and you can you don't really have to rush from body to body or organization to organization. The bureaucratic chain can be cut down, and your environmental compliances, your labor law compliances, they can be in the form of a self-attested compliance. Next one, guys, patent application. So once you register yourself as a startup, you get a lot of benefits in registering your patents. What a patent is, guys, let me just give you a short overview. A patent is basically the protection that you give to your innovation under law. In very simple words, if you have any innovative idea that can be developed into a product or service, the idea itself is not important. The idea and it's the idea being developed into a product or service, that is what is a patent. So if you are registering yourself as a startup, you can get 80% rebate in filing patents, and also your patent would be given a priority and it will be registered under a fast track, because ideally, and the average lifespan of getting a patent registered and a patent approved is 5 to 6 years, because there are a lot of disputes involved. But this is not the case with startups. The patent, the registrar and all, they take it up quickly under this scheme. The next one is public procurement. Fast track under the criteria of prior experience turnover for startups in all central government ministries department. So, if you are registered as a startup, then you also get certain relaxations. Like if you are a startup in the sector of civil engineering or something of that sort, then certain conditions might be relaxed for you, like prior experience or turnover. Like certain government tenders, if you see infrastructure tenders, they have this minimum requirement that the company should have done projects worth 100 CR before, or they must have a prior experience of 10 years. So once you register yourself as a startup, now what the government has done is, if you are registered as a startup, then you would be given some relaxations in this. Then again, under the new Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016 that has been enacted, the winding up procedure is reduced to 90 days. Winding up means, if you want to shut down your company for some reason, then in 90 days you can shut down your entire business. A 10,000 crore fund for investment into startups through alternate investment funds has been allocated. 2,000 crore credit guarantee fund for startups through National Credit Guarantee Trust (SIDBI) for over 4 years has been allotted. There are multiple tax exemptions. Like for 3 years, there's a tax 7 that is given to startups. Then further tax exemptions on capital gains and on investments above fair market value. The drawbacks are, that the banks have to incur certain losses because of the interest rates. Then technological dependency is there, because nowadays all the startups have to be some or the other way, it's become a norm that they have to be linked with technology. Either they have to have an app or they have to have a website. So this is one of the drawbacks. Then there's a lot of foreign intervention, as regards the investors and the seed capitalists. And the infrastructure is not that sound to support the startups and the emerging ideas yet. It is in process. It's a work in progress. So now moving on, what are the eligibility criteria to get the benefits of the startup initiative, the startup scheme? So the definition of a startup is that a startup is an entity, a private limited company, registered partnership firm, or an LLP that is headquartered in India. So it has to be either of these organizations. It has to be either a private limited company, a registered partnership firm, an LLP. We will be moving as to, in the next coming slides, I will be explaining as to what is the difference between each of the following, and legally what is the better option considering your, your requirements and your capital and all of that. Then the next requirement, the next eligibility criteria is that it has to be opened within a span of 5 years. It can't be more than 5 years. Only then can you categorize it as a startup. The next one is that the annual turnover of this startup should be, or the company should be, less than 25 crore. Only then you can get the benefits of this scheme. Then the entity should not be formed by splitting up or reconstruction, and its turnover should not have crossed 25 crore during its existence. So the reason behind having this condition is that what many companies can do because of this scheme is that they can, there might be a 100 CR company and they can split it into 4 companies to just, get the benefits of the initiative. So hence it is a pre-mandatory condition that the turnover should not have crossed 25 crores during its entire course of existence. The next one being, now coming at the types of business, and what are the machineries that can be incorporated to, set up your own company. It can either be a proprietorship, it can be a partnership, it can be a limited liability company or a private limited company. So proprietorship is basically a sole entity. It's not a separate legal entity, like a single person, like your, kirana shop owner. That's a proprietorship. There is no formality or registration involved as such. Then partnership is like 2 or more people coming together under the Indian Partnership Act. If they enter into a partnership deed or a formal agreement to work together, that's a partnership. Both of them have equal liabilities and an equal share in it, depending on their terms that are agreed. And LLP it's a separate legal entity, but the promoters of the LLP are not personally liable. So the difference between a partnership and an LLP is that in a partnership, all the promoters or all the partners are personally responsible for all the liabilities. Whereas in an LLP, the promoters are not personally liable. It's the LLP that is liable, and they have their liabilities limited to the extent of their own shares. A private limited company is registered under the Companies Act. Again, the promoters are also not personally liable in this. Then just looking at different, legal details, registration, whether it's required in proprietorship, no formal registration is required. In a partnership, it's optional. In an LLP, it has to be registered under the LLP Act 2008, whereas a private limited company has to be registered with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs under the Companies Act 2013. The legal status, as I've already discussed, I'll just repeat. Proprietorship is not recognized as a separate entity, and a promoter is personally liable for all liabilities. Whereas in a partnership, it's not recognized as a separate entity, and promoters are personally liable for all liabilities. In an LLP, again, as I've already mentioned, the promoters are not personally liable. A private limited company, the promoters are liable only up to their share, and they're not personally liable. Member liability, again, unlimited. It's limited to the liability of the share, and then again to the extent of share capital. Then transferability. A sole proprietorship is not transferable, neither is a partnership transferable. Whereas in an LLP, an ownership can be transferred. Also, a private limited company ownership can be transferred by means of shares. Minimum number of members. A proprietorship can have only 1 person, whereas a partnership needs to have minimum 2 people. Same is with an LLP. And in a private limited company, now under the 2013 Act, the concept of 1 person company has come. So even with 1 person, you can have a private limited company. As regards the taxation now, guys, in a proprietorship, it's taxed as an individual based on the total income of the proprietor. So there is no separate entity. So the individual who is there, as I had given an example of a guy who owns a kirana store, that's a proprietorship. So whatever income he's making as an individual, regardless of his business, that is taxed on his individual liability. Then in partnership, profits are taxed as per the slabs provided under the Income Tax Act 1961, plus surcharge and cess as applicable. In LLP, the profits are taxed as per the slabs provided under Income Tax Act, plus the surcharge and cess as applicable. In a private limited company, profits are taxed as per the slabs provided under Income Tax Act, plus surcharge and cess. Then, guys, the next compliance is annual statutory meeting. Again, in the proprietorship, no such meeting is required, neither in partnership or LLP. Only in a case of a private limited company, board meetings and general meetings should be conducted periodically, as mentioned in the Companies Act 2013. Then annual filings. In case of proprietorship, ideally how an individual fills the income tax, he has to do it. In a partnership, yes, they have to give the report with the registrar of companies. Then the income tax has to be filed accordingly. Same for the LLP and for the company as well. Existence or survivability. Proprietorship existence is dependent on the proprietor. Partnership's existence is dependent on the partners. It can be dissolved at will or upon the death of the partners. Existence in an LLP, however, is not dependent on the partners. It can be dissolved voluntarily or by an order of the company law board. In a company, most peculiarly, this is the major advantage of forming a company under the Companies Act. Since a company is a separate legal entity, the existence is not dependent on directors or shareholders. It can be dissolved voluntarily or by regulatory authorities. So even if one of the members of the company, the promoters of the company dies, the company does not dissolve per se. The company and the business keeps running. New people keep coming, and hence this is the primary advantage of forming a company, apart from the others that I've given you. Foreigners are allowed to invest with or without the approval of RBI and other applicable permissions. So in all the three of them, whereas in a company, also the foreigners are allowed to invest with or without the approval of RBI and with the permission of relevant government authorities. Then foreign ownership. In case of sole proprietorship, the foreigners are not allowed to be sole owners. Also, they are not allowed to be partners. Whereas in the case of an LLP, they can be, provided they have some compliances. Also, they can purchase shares of a private limited company. Then again, as I already discussed, the requirements, being a private limited company or any of the forms that I've already discussed is one of the prerequisites. The incorporated companies must have existing businesses aren't eligible. All services and products and other related schemes of the company are creative and customer centric. The overall age has to be 5 years. I've already discussed this, so I won't bother repeating this again. Some of the new points are that they need to have a recommendation letter from an incubator. Now, what is an incubator? I've already explained. An incubator is someone who some organization that helps you for funding, for infrastructure, for hiring employees, basically to run your business and to establish your business. So there are certain startups which might require a recommendation letter from an incubator. Now, what all documents will you guys need for registering your startup? Here's a brief list that I've prepared as to what all you guys will need. Your DIN details, that is your director identification number if it's a company, complete profile verification details, PAN card number, your return proof related to your official link, pitch or deck. Basically, the third one is just for looking at what the business is. Either it has to be a video or an official website or a pitch deck or a link or some sort of app. The next one then being startups incorporation or registration certificate. Whether it's a company, then the MOA, the memorandum of association, all of that of the company. If it's a partnership, then a partnership deed. Basically, the parent document which lays down as to how the business is structured and who are the owners and all of that. Then the next one is details about patent and trademark. So if at all the startup or the company has applied for a patent or a registered trademark, then the details as regards those registration, a trademark certificate or the patent pending certificate or the application certificate. Then the next one, as I've already mentioned, articles of association, incorporation. So in the case of companies, private limited companies, the articles of association are the primary parent document, the AOA and the MOA, memorandum of association and articles of association that determine as to how the company is going to function, what is the distribution of shares amongst the promoters. So this is something that you might require. Then a non-disclosure agreement per se between the partners that NDA specifically, if it's a unique idea, then it will not be leaked without the permission of so and so partners, so and so promoters, or under so and so conditions. So an NDA is something that is very important. So if an NDA is in picture, even the NDA has to be disclosed. Then the employee contracts and offer letters. So if there are employees that are already hired or employees that are to be hired, then you might need their contracts and offer letters and what conditions and terms you're hiring them. Then a shareholders agreement in case of private limited company guys or a public limited company as well. The shareholders agreement has to be there as to ascertain as to what proportion each owner is having in this company, what stake each owner is having in the company. If there are any bylaws which are designed, bylaws are basically our own set of rule book which the organization might design for itself. Then intellectual property assignment agreement. So if the startup is of such a form that it has taken up the idea of some other company, it has purchased the idea by way of an assignment, then the IP assignment agreements have to be given. The founder and the co-founder agreement, if per se between the founders or the co-founders there is some sort of an arrangement prior to incorporating the business as to who will do what is the role or what is the job of every person, something of in the sort of an MOA, a MOU, a memorandum of understanding between two people or two or more people. Then the last one again, business plan, pitch deck, which is already covered in the third point as I've already discussed. So these are certain documents that you'll have to get in place if you want to register your startup under the Startup India scheme. Now, I will just try and cover the procedural part as to how do you register your startups. So you log into the Startup India portal. You choose your legal entity as I've already described. It can be either a company, a proprietorship, an LLP, or a private limited company. You choose what kind of entity your organization is. Then you incorporate, input your incorporation registration number, registration date. You put in your PAN number. You input your address with zip, postal code, and state. You give the authorized representatives details, directors details, partners details, and then your documents and ID proofs and self-certification documents. Then your incorporation certificate, registration certificate of whatever organization is. Then you have to specifically register to avail tax and IPR benefits. And then in the end, you have to certify and accept all the official notifications, terms and conditions, and then you're good to go. Now, most importantly, I will be covering as to what all steps are involved in incorporation of a startup. The first and foremost step is that you have to formalize a business structure and have a founders agreement. The first thing to starting any business is to be clear about the nature and type of the business. As to you have to know that what you're going to do. Is it a product? Is it a service? Is it something in the form of a website or an app or whatever it is? It can be any business. It can be a street side stall also. But then you have to be clear about the nature and type of business. Then moving on, then legally you have to make sure that you have a clear picture in your mind as to in what form the business is going to be incorporated. As I've already discussed, I think it can either be a sole proprietorship, private limited company, public limited partnership, limited liability partnership, so on and so forth. So the pros and cons of, if I may just highlight it because it's a very crucial aspect. So if it's a small business, if it's a single person that's handling the business, it's a boutique business like a grocery store or a hairdresser. So it can be registered as a sole proprietorship. To give it a more formal look, if your aim is to have the business have some sort of brand value in the market, get your patents registered and all, so it's advisable that you register it as a private limited company, or then if the share capital permits, then a public limited company. And if you don't want to get into the compliances part too much, but you want to have some formal agreement, if there are more than two people, you want to have some formal agreement, then a partnership is recommended, provided both the people are equally involved in the business and are ready to take up the entire liability of the business or all the losses. Then the last one is an LLP. The only difference between an LLP and a partnership, as I've already described, is that in an LLP, the liability of the members is only limited to their share in the business, only to that extent. So an LLP is nowadays very much in vogue, I may say, because it does not have the hassles that have to be undergone in incorporation of a private limited company. That there's a lot of compliance that has to be done on an annual basis if it's a private limited company. Whereas in an LLP, you have the formal structure as well, and you don't have to face the hassles. So it is very essential to have this clarity at the very beginning, as this will be integral to the business overall vision and goals, both short term and long term. You have to keep your long term goals in mind, guys, because if you are planning to set up a big company, like if you're aiming to set up a 100 crore or a 500 crore company, you can't have a sole proprietor, you can't have it in the form of a sole proprietorship. You will have to get yourself registered as a company, if you want to raise funding. Funding is one of the most important aspects of a startup, because nowadays everyone wants their business to grow and scale, and to grow and scale, you need money, you need investments. So whenever if you're going to pitch it to someone, to some investor, the first impression which a person might have looking at it, that's a private limited company, that it shows that the people who are involved are serious about the business. And also, as regards the shareholding and adding new people on board, it becomes very easy if it's a private limited company. As regards the partnership or the limited liability partnership, because you have to remodify it, you have to dissolve the earlier one. So in my opinion, it is advisable to register it as a private limited company. Then the second one is you have to apply for business licenses. So the common license that is applicable to all businesses is the Shop and Establishment Act, which is applicable to all premises where the trade, business or profession is carried out. In case, this is like a very basic license, Shop and Establishment Act. Any shop, any office, any salon, any grocery store, all of them need to have this basic license under the Shop and Establishment Act. Now, other business licenses again may vary from industry to industry. So, it all depends. If it's a startup like Bira, the number of licenses, like the entire business revolves around getting the licenses. I'm sure most of you must have heard about the brand Bira. Then, for instance, an e-commerce company may require additional licenses like VAT registration, service tax registration, professional tax, etc. Where a restaurant may require licenses like food safety license, certificate of environmental clearance, prevention of food and adulteration act, health trade license, along with the above mentioned licenses. So again, guys, it depends on the type of business it is. The licenses would be, if it's pharma, then again the licensing might be different. Then third one is that you have to have an understanding of the taxation and accounting laws. Again, even this depends on the types of business. So if, as I'd already described, if it's an individual, if it's the proprietorship, then the individual's income tax is the income tax of the firm or the startup or whatever. If it's a partnership deed, then it has to be registered separately. The tax liability is separate from the individual. Same goes for the LLP and same goes for the company. Then, most important point, guys, whenever you start a company or any organization, you have to adhere to several labor laws. Now, depending on what form of business or how labor intensive business it is, there are several acts which are laid down. The Industrial Disputes Act 1947, the Trade Union Act 1926, the Building and Construction Workers Act 1996, Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act 1946, so on and so forth. I won't read all of them. So these are certain acts that one person might needs to have a knowledge of whenever he or she is getting into a business that involves a lot of manual labor, or a lot of employees, or I may say workmen. So all these laws have to be adhered to. Then fifth step is that you have to ensure the protection of your intellectual property. So how can you protect your intellectual property? There are various modes of doing it. The two of them I've already discussed, patent and trademark. Patent is the protection that you get for your idea or the innovation. The basic prerequisites of a patent are that it has to have some element of novelty. Number two, it has to be in a workable form. It has to be, you can't patent an idea basically. You have to have the application patented. The application of the idea, either the product or the service. Trademark is basically the protection that is afforded to your brand, your logo. Like we see the brand Coca-Cola, Pepsi, or any of such brands. So the the tagline or all of that, the visual appeal, the visual description that is there, that is basically trademark. And copyright is for literary works. So if you have a particular tagline or a particular slogan, then that can be copyrighted. Copyrighted is usually associated with literary and art forms, music scripts, film scripts, and some things like that. These are, in short, I've given a gist of as to the IP protection that you'll have to look forward to protect your business. Because IP protection is something that is very important in today's day and time. Because every day I see so many matters nowadays that one person comes up with an idea, the idea is brilliant, but just because the person is negligent enough in not protecting his or her IP or his intellectual property, someone else copies the same idea, gets it registered, and then there are conflicts and disputes as to who came up with the idea first, and so on and so forth. Then the next one is ensuring effective contract management. The Indian Contracts Act 1872, guys, it lays down just lays down the basic prerequisites of contracts. Apart from this, all the contracts that are involved in your business, they have to be managed in such a way that the rights and liabilities are clearly defined. There is no confusion. Starting from your shareholders contract, the co-founders agreement, all of the things have to be on paper. The more the number of contracts, the safer and the secure your business is, and then the lesser the chance of having disputes in future. Now, just this point has come up, so I would like to mention nowadays all the major contracts have an arbitration clause. So it's very advisable, very much advisable to have an arbitration clause in any of the contracts, be it inter se between the members or even with the third parties, because God forbid any dispute arises in the company, in the running of the business, with the vendors, with the shareholders per se. If you go to court, the average lifespan of any litigation is minimum 5 to 10 years. Whereas if you have an arbitration clause, it's very much easier in the sense to get your disputes adjudicated and resolved at a much quicker pace and at a much more cost-efficient manner as well. Then last but not the least, as regards winding down the business. Winding down means shutting the business. So if for any reason you have to shut down your business or close the business, there might be losses, there might be some change in the policy which has banned your business totally. So there are 3 modes. The government has come up with this fast track exit mode under the recent scheme, wherein you can just submit your papers and you can close down the entity in the span of 60 days. Then there is a court or tribunal route, wherein you can go for winding up of the company under section 499 of the Companies Act. And then again, as I've mentioned, voluntary closure. If it's a partnership deed, then there can be a dissolution of the deed or a dissolution of LLP by the partners per se, and it can be closed that. Now, another aspect that I was to discuss is about the incubators. So an incubator is basically a company that helps to nurture young firms during their early months or years. It usually provides affordable space, shared offices and services, hands-on management training, marketing support, and often access to some form of financing. The government has issued a list of incubators on the website. There are a total 118 incubators that have registered themselves in this initiative. The list of incubators includes details like the name of the incubator, their thrust area, state, city, and complete address with website, details of the contact person, name, designation, email ID, and phone number. So eligibility criteria of the incubators, guys, it either has to be a society under the Society Registration Act, a company under the Companies Act, or a private limited company under the Companies Act, public company, or an LLP. So it has to be an organization. Basically, an individual cannot be registered as an incubator. It has to be either of the two. So now, discussing the impact of this initiative that has been taken by the government, a lot of jobs have been created, because more the number of businesses, more the number of employees, and more the number of jobs. There has been an exponential increase in the export. The third one is that if the production is increased, it will automatically lower the price of goods and services. So this is how even the consumer will benefit. Then it will increase the multiplier effect. More the businesses, more the profits, and so on and so forth. The per capita income of the country might rise because of this initiative. The standard of living will improve. The marginal propensity to consume will go up, and the GDP as well might be benefited by this. New technologies, new innovations might be encouraged, which might, again, help the consumer, the standard citizen to avail of much better services. Again, this has led to a lot of industrialization, as I've already mentioned. So, certain findings: India is a home for almost 3,100 startups starting per year, standing just behind US, UK, and Israel, according to the NASSCOM report of 2015. If the growth is continued on the same pace, then it is expected that Indian tech startups will generate almost 2.5 lakh jobs in the next 5 years. That's a great number, guys. The Small Industrials Development Bank of India, SIDBI, has approved 930 crore in disbursements from the 2,000 crore fund of funds it launched in August to support venture capital funds for startups. It is anticipated that by 2020, India will be a home to 112 million working population, falling in the age bracket of 20 to 24 years as compared to that of 94 million workers of China. So, I mean, I don't know how true this has turned out to be considering the COVID situation in the past 2 years, but we can always hope for the best. India projected the highest ever GDP annual growth rate of 7.3% in the last 15 years. With 40 to 50% of startups dying within 5 years of their inception. To cope up with this problem, the government has linked with Google, Facebook, Apple, LinkedIn, and Twitter to boost the entrepreneurial culture in the millennial generation. So all of these schemes, ventures, they have been, the government has done a great job in using the social media for these purposes. The next one being, with 3.6 crore units spread across the country that employ 8.05 crore people, micro, small, and medium enterprises, MSMEs, have a contribution of 37.5% to the country's GDP. That's a great number. That's a huge number, guys. So you can imagine the extent of, the extent of contribution these startups or these MSMEs are having to the overall GDP of the country as well. Now, which is the best city to start up in India? So number one is Bangalore. 34.78% of startups are from Bangalore. Then number two is Mumbai. 20.90% startups are from Bombay. And number three, we have Chennai, that is 9.09, and NCR again 9.09. Then Ahmedabad and Pune, and then the others. Now there are a few suggestions which have come up with. The Department of Industrial Policy has to design a learning module to educate the startups in areas including incorporation of companies, business models. Because this is again my personal suggestion, because many of the business owners, they are very well aware of the businesses, but they're not really given the appropriate advice when it comes to what form of entity they need to get themselves registered, what are the compliances they have to get themselves acquainted with. Because for running any business, just knowing the business is not important. How to make it compliant in all forms, be it legal, be it financial, be it from the tax perspective. It's a very important thing, so as to ensure the smooth functioning of your business. Because one fallacy or one problem and the entire business can go haywire. The service is to be provided free to startups through an empaneled group of advocates, so that the startups will no longer need a certificate of recognition from the government to access legal help for filing patents. So again, many initiatives such as patent registration must be given at a cheaper rate by the government itself, so as to encourage people to innovate more, to come up with more ideas. Because patents and getting themselves registered, it's an expensive process and a time consuming process. So not everyone can afford it, and this can lead to dying of ideas or demotivation sort of a thing for new innovators and new founders to come up with new ideas. The next one being that the industry should plan to impose a cap on fees that can be charged by incubators for certifying a startup as an innovative business. So the incubators are also authorized to certify that this startup is an innovative business, or this company classifies as a startup. So they might charge certain fees. So there has to be some upper cap on the fees that are charged. Government of India should work on providing incubators who help founders on every thrust of startup, or we can say except e-commerce business. So there has been a trend nowadays, guys, that only e-commerce businesses are being encouraged, be it by the government, be it by the incubators. So this trend has to change. All forms of businesses, even offline businesses, basically must be treated as par or at parity with the e-commerce businesses. This is another suggestion that I have. This is one of the most important suggestions. In fact, because with time, even though we are getting technologically advanced, but then we should not really be, detached from our roots. So the startups at the village level, I may say, or the traditional startups, like your Khadi Bhavan or something like a cattle farm. Even they are startups. But even if there is no innovation per se on the face of it, but then they must be encouraged so that even they can come up with certain innovations and certain newer ways of doing the old traditional things. So this is one of my last suggestion. To conclude, the initiative is the necessity to lead India in the right direction. The most important point about this campaign is that it involves youth of the country as startups, as their fresh mind, innovative ideas, strength, energy, skill, and thinking to lead the business. Developed nations are looking towards fast-growing and emerging nations such as India to gain maximum from the huge untapped potential markets. In the recent years, different countries are taking different initiatives to link up their businesses with Indian startups in almost all sectors, including defense. Such joint venture can attract huge foreign funds, which can boost the country's growth. And that's it. I mean, that's the end of the PPT. If you guys have any questions, I would be welcome to take your questions.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
You can either raise your hand or send your questions in the chat box. Sir, the first question is from Anushka. She is asking how can one ensure legal compliance in their businesses?
So yeah, the easiest way for ensuring legal compliance in your business is to either hire a lawyer or a company secretary who knows what compliances are required. Who can have a look at your accounts, your books, and everything. Even hire a chartered accountant. So I mean that's an easiest way because a business owner can't be expected to be a jack of all trades. He can't know the law. He can't know the tax regulations and all. So it's advisable to get a company secretary, a chartered accountant, or a lawyer involved as per the requirements. And yeah, that's what.
Okay. So the next question is from Disha. She's asking which permissions, registrations, and license one required for businesses.
So again, it depends on the type of business. It all depends on what form of business you're getting into. Like as I've already given an example, if it's a pharmacy business, then the licensing is totally different. You have to get a lot of certifications from the government, from the Ayush department, from the environment clearances have to be there. But it all depends on the type of business that is involved. The licenses will be on that. Yeah.
Sir, Afan is asking what are the laws related to businesses, startups in general or in India?
So in general, there are no general laws as such. Like there's the Companies Act, the LLP Act, Partnership Act, which lay down the basics of how a company is formed. And as regards startups, we don't have an act or a law specifically with reference to startups. All we have is this startup scheme that has come into picture, which, as I've already discussed, which classifies what is a startup and what are the eligibility criteria to benefit to avail the benefits of the scheme. So there's no law as such. There is only this one scheme that is there.
Okay. Sir, Hardi is asking how can I know if I'm infringing on someone's intellectual property?
So that you'll have to, there is a registry and online also you can go and check, if it's a trademark, then you can just put in the name of the trademark and you'll get to know that whether it's registered or not. So if you come up with a name tomorrow, you have to go and check on the website itself, the domain name and all, that whether someone has already used it or taken it. So that way you'll come to know whether you're infringing it or it's like something new or novel.
Okay, thank you, sir, for addressing all our questions. Now, I would like to invite our principal, ma'am, Dr. Munira Momin, to enlighten us with a few words. Over to you, ma'am.
Yes. Thank you, Yasin. Thank you, entire BNCP team for arranging this session. And thank you, Advocate Veer, for addressing our students. And I could see, I joined a little later, but I could see that students have developed a kind of an interest in legal matters, and what you discussed has covered the outline of what they should be thinking. And you rightly said that the business person would not be is not expected to be the master of all, and every different department would be there, and the expert for every department would be there. So I'm sure your talk has given a kind of insight and a direction to all our students that whenever they start thinking of entrepreneurship or starting their own firm, what all things they should be keeping in mind. And it is always good for all the business people and the youngsters, those who are thinking of starting their startup, they should be knowing in and out at least, if not the mastery on that particular area or on the particular portfolio. So thank you, Mr. Veer, for discussing this point and giving them food for thought on what all are the requirements from legal perspective, as well as from the kind of startup as an overview of how they can start thinking. It's not only the money, it's not only the idea, but they need to fulfill a lot of other requirements um, of government as well as the state government and all. So thank you once again. Thank you for addressing our student, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Over to you, Yasin.
Yes. Sir, can you please unshare the screen? We have to share this.
Yeah. So please. Yeah.
Just a minute. Yes, there is some technical issue. This is a small token of appreciation from our side. It was a really informative session, and I'm sure the valuable knowledge that you provided will help us in our career. Once again, I would like to thank Mr. Veer Kankaria for taking out time from his busy schedule to enlighten us with knowledge. We look forward to follow your path of success. I hope you all enjoyed the session. IIC will continue to bring such content to you. Till then, stay safe and think out of the box.
All right then. Thank you guys.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.